So I was supposed to give a little introduction to the presentation of Shelby, but because we're quite late, we're running out of schedule, I will just skip my presentation and let Shelby do her part of the presentation. It will be about horse-friendly conduct and non-horse-friendly conduct. It's a little bit based on the German Equestrian Federation, who has a criteria catalog, and Dr. Charles Trollier will talk about this tomorrow morning normally in the explanations of the FEI about the rules and everything. So Shelby will present her part of the story. Thank you very much, Shelby. So Shelby Dennis is founder of Milestone Equestrian, certified equine behavior consultant from the International Association of Animal Behavior Consultants, member of the Alliance for Horse Welfare in Sport. And so she will talk about non-horse-friendly riding, what's in it for the rider. And Shelby came all the way from Canada. So I would like you to try to keep concentrated a little more. I know it's long, but just please, she came all the way from Canada, just please try to stay concentrated. Thank you very much, Shelby.
So for people who are not familiar with the competition ring, I'm sure some people are wondering, why do riders do all of this stuff that we've been talking about today? What is the motivation to engage in hyperflexion, and where does it start? And that is my topic for today. So thank you for having me here, and I'm really excited to be here. Okay. So it starts very young. The young horse classes and other similar classes that set specific requirements that horses have to fulfill from a young age encourages rushing right from the get-go. Many of the young horse classes occur while horses are still actively maturing, both mentally and physically, but they are advantageous to riders and breeders to compete in due to increasing the value of horses and speeding up the path up the levels. Young horses brought up the levels too quickly cannot develop the muscular fitness and body control that is required of them to move correctly, making training tactics such as hyperflexion more likely to occur due to their physical weakness pushing them to adopt certain postures, in addition to riders pressuring such postures to try to move them up the levels as quickly as possible. In dressage, the demands of young horse classes include ages 4, 5, 6, and 7, with tests equivalent from first level to fourth level, with the 4-year-olds starting at first level movements and the 7-year-olds doing fourth level movements. With jumping, the max jumping heights are on the right side there. That's the height that all of those ages are expected to jump after July 1st of their calendar year, meaning 4-year-olds are starting at 1.5 meters and they're finishing the year at 1.10 meters, with 7-year-olds starting the year at 1.30 meters and finishing at 1.35 meters. Riders might not be aware that the conduct is harmful because it is normalized and enabled in competition by organizations like USEF, FEI, and Equestrian Canada. And people look to organizations such as those show organizations to set rules that are to protect the horses. And when they do not do that, there is the assumption that those regulations are set to protect horses when they really aren't. In order for these horses to be competing at the levels asked of them in young horse classes, they have to be pushed to work at non-age appropriate levels. This starts the process of rushing horses and engaging in non-horse friendly practices, normalizing such practices from the very start of the horses' careers. Many riders assume that competition allowing and rewarding certain types of training must mean that it is ethical, especially when organizations like the FEI state in their own rule book, and I quote, "Welfare is paramount." But when there's no real outline of how exactly welfare is being measured and defined, it is impossible to properly advocate for horses in the way that show organizations need to be, and it also means that organizations like the FEI cannot be held accountable because they're not quantifying how they are measuring what is and isn't good welfare. Riding behind the vertical is rewarded in elite dressage competition. When we have studies that are showing trends of frequent conflict behaviors in elite competition horses, in addition to evidence that harmful riding, such as riding behind the vertical, is actually being rewarded in competition, it is time for immediate change. Something that I want to note is that dressage is one of the only disciplines where horses are marked on relaxation, rhythm, and suppleness. And for that to be one of the disciplines that we see most frequently rewarding riding behind the vertical sets a very bad precedent because it's teaching people that that is what relaxation is. If those horses are winning and that's one of the factors that the judges are marking them on, people in the general horse community, whether they compete or not, are going to look up to those riders and assume that what they're doing is correct. Conflict behaviors are behavioral signals horses display that are strongly correlated to stress. One of the most common studied factors for increasing conflict behaviors is riding behind the vertical. When riders are not penalized, or worse, when they're rewarded for harmful practice, it gives them incentive to continue such practices. There are enough published studies now determining that riding behind the vertical is associated with stress in horses, along with physical issues such as reduced breathing capacity, impeded vision, and musculoskeletal problems. With the number of equine pain and stress studies that there are now that directly link specific behaviors to a high likelihood of underlying physical or emotional pain and discomfort, stewards and riders can both be trained to recognize and work to avoid these behaviors. What I have here is from Dr. Sue Dyson's ridden pain ethogram, and the behaviors that I've highlighted are the most common ones that we'll see in dressage horses, in my opinion. You would be hard-pressed to find a single dressage test at the upper levels that doesn't exhibit these behaviors in high prevalence. So there is no longer an excuse for our industry to continue to enable practices that are strongly linked to equine discomfort. And currently, we have numerous studies that are showing clear trends of stress in competition horses. And something that I want to note in addition to that is that there's far more studies that are showing trends of stress in competition horses than there are indicating that there's absolutely no problems. And whether or not they need to be proven more distinctly, I think it's something to look at when it's showing negative welfare state, and it's reoccurring in numerous studies for a number of years. We are at the point research-wise where we need to address the elephant in the room and stop denying the presence of these issues. Denial will only prolong the issue, and it harms our horses while putting the industry at risk of losing its social license. Poor horse welfare may not be obvious. It's advantageous for horses to hide their pain and stress. This is second nature to them due to it being a protective mechanism as a flight animal, because if they appear weak, it puts them at risk of predation. Riders often use this behavior that horses exhibit, masking their pain and stress, to their advantage to claim that if they didn't want to do something, they wouldn't do it, or that if they were in pain, they would outwardly show that discomfort. That's not necessarily true. Contrary to popular belief, compliance doesn't equate to willingness. Horses may go along with what we tell them to do despite being very afraid or uncomfortable with the task. Some studies have documented correlation between high obedience scores and increased evidence of chronic stress response when testing cortisol markers in the body, suggesting that learned helplessness is a factor in obedient horses. Learned helplessness is a behavioral phenomenon that we see when horses' previous attempts to communicate their discomfort and evade a situation have been ignored. Eventually, with repetition, they'll learn that resistance is futile and that their desire to express their behaviors doesn't get them anywhere, and they'll stop reacting to the stimuli that stresses them out in their environment in the same way that they naturally would. This allows riders to ignore their stress and label their training methods as totally ethical because the horse isn't necessarily going to pitch a big fight. Because of this, we cannot use compliance or competition success as a measure of what is and isn't ethical training. I'm sure virtually every single person in this room can think of the argument that people use when they're trying to defend certain training practices, and they'll go, I don't see you in the FEI ring. I don't see you riding at the upper levels. And that is an argument that negates all of this research that we have, because riding at the upper levels does not mean that someone is capable of reading pain and stress signals in the horse. And it also doesn't mean that the horses are necessarily happy, because currently our upper level competitions do not require ethical riding and training of their riders in order for them to win. Mistreated horses can still be highly successful in competition because currently our competitions do not mandate ethical riding practice. And in fact, oftentimes the unethical practices see a greater reward. If you can move your horse up the levels more quickly, profit greater from selling them, and market yourself better as a professional by pushing them harder and doing things that are inherently unethical, and there's no one really pressuring you to consider the fact that they're unethical, what incentive is there to not do that? You will earn more money as a professional by engaging in tactics that allow you to do well in the show ring. And that's just a simple fact. There's a lot of money involved in this. Okay, so I selected a series of videos that depict upper-level riders either in competition, in clinics where they're teaching their methods to other people, or in master classes that they're selling online. This is a very notable, internationally acclaimed upper-level rider doing a clinic in front of a massive crowd, as you can see here. Oh, I left my notes over it. Could you pass me my notes? Thank you. Perfect. So people often use riders' prestige to defend the fact that their training cannot be unethical. This perpetuates the welfare problem in the industry when elite-level riders are enabled in engaging in knowingly damaging practices such as hyperflexion. See this video of an upper-level dressage rider engaging in hyperflexion in front of a large crowd of people. When non-horse-friendly conduct like this is enabled and encouraged, even at the pinnacle of the sport, we cannot expect to have ethical treatment of horses in competition. This next slide shows clips that took place at an FEI-sanctioned show in the warm-up ring. And during all of these clips, which you'll see at the end, the steward and the show vet are standing at the sideline watching. I had to bleep out the rider's face, but he's seesawing on the horse's mouth in this clip. And these aren't the only clips. There is numerous clips like this with different types of riders in the time that was showed. That was really quick at the end because I had to blur out their faces. But these two fellas right here are the steward and the show vet watching all this stuff happening and not doing anything about it. If training practices that are shown to be harmful can occur directly in front of show officials and go without repercussions, welfare is not being treated as paramount in competition. Conduct in both the warm-up ring and show ring needs to be taken more seriously by horse show organizations. Otherwise, when they put things in their rule book such as welfare is paramount, it's just virtue signaling, it's just words. They're not actually fulfilling that in practice whatsoever. Top-level riders are not exempt from displaying non-horse-friendly practices. This is another upper-level rider, once again in front of a large crowd in a very public audience, and this clip was selected by the FEI for advertising purposes. I want you to notice the horse's tongue when they zoom in on the horse's face, and you'll notice that it looks very oxygen-deprived from blood. So I'm going to pause it. So it appears to be blue. Some people might argue that it's the lighting in the show ring. I can't really think of any time where I've had my horse photographed with a tongue that color ever. And this is a very well-known, internationally acclaimed rider, and the FEI selected this to advertise. So what this means is either they're completely unaware of the welfare repercussions of riding like this, or they simply do not care. And both of those things are concerns. Riders should not be able to engage in this type of behavior in the competition ring and go without any recourse on the part of show stewards and show staff. If training practices that are shown to be harmful can occur directly in front of show officials and go without repercussions, it's not what these organizations are claiming to do in their rule books is not actually happening. So there have been a number of occurrences of horses in FEI-sanctioned competitions exhibiting numerous stress and pain behaviors, some more obvious than others. And this is obviously a more obvious case because the tongue is blue. When moments like this go unnoticed and unpunished by judges, stewards and competitors alike can't be held accountable. Riders have no incentive to stop doing these types of practices if they don't see the problem with it, if they're enabled in doing so in competition. So it's of the utmost importance for shows to better regulate. This is a masterclass with another upper-level rider. This is not a dressage horse, this is a jumper, but lots of these types of masterclasses are being sold online now, and there's a ton of them where horses are going around extremely hyperflexed. And once again, this is something that's being sold to riders who are seeking guidance from a professional who they trust to teach them correct and healthy training methods for their horses.
I just want to say something, Shelby. These images are from a publicity of a nutrition. Okay. Yeah, it's not a masterclass. It's
the next
publicity from a nutrition mark.
In addition to harmful practices being normalized in competition, we also see these practices normalized in training and marketing to market things to equestrians as good training practice. This is the one from the master class. This is another very well-known upper-level dressage rider. Equestrians have less opportunity to change when harmful practices go unchecked, both in warm-up and competition. And it also means that people have no incentive to not train like this at home, because if they're rewarded for this in competition, why would they train differently at home? Many well-known riders are now selling master classes and training videos. This can be a great way to make training access more accessible to riders of all sorts because it's more affordable. But currently, given how many harmful training practices are rampantly seen in the industry, it can also sell unsuspecting riders methods that can harm their horses when that's not their intention. Few, if any, riders want to harm their horses. This is why it's imperative to properly educate equestrians on the impact of the training methods that they use and discourage the use of harmful training practices in and out of competition. Suggested steps to make competition more horse-friendly. It's imperative that horse people remember that upper-level riders are not infallible. They make mistakes too. They don't always know what the right thing to do is, and sometimes they may deliberately engage in the wrong thing, knowing that it's wrong. They are just people. They're not people who should be put up on a pedestal. They're just riders just like you and I. They do not have to have any ill intent towards their horses to engage in harmful practice. You don't have to operate with deliberate malice to have your actions cause harm. They could merely be doing what their instructors and role models have trained them to do and what judges in competition reward. This perpetuates poor welfare practices by encouraging others to do the same, because people look up to these upper-level riders, and then it has a trickle-down effect to encourage other people to engage in these same practices, whether they opt to compete or not. So by improving horse welfare in competition, we can improve horse welfare and rider safety. So the suggested steps for stewards and competitors alike to make competition more horse-friendly would be to establish an industry-wide definition for good horse welfare using evidence-based research. Any show organization that states that horse welfare is paramount should be required to actually substantiate how they are measuring welfare. Otherwise, there's no accountability whatsoever, and they can just decide what the terms of welfare in their perspective are. 2, train stewards and regulatory staff to use equine pain and stress ethograms during show events. This allows them a very easy, structured manner of determining how many stress behaviors a horse might be exhibiting during competition or in the warm-up ring, and it'll make it easier for them to choose when to make a call. Penalize competition riders for non-horse-friendly conduct. This doesn't necessarily mean we need to completely ban them from competition, but if they were carded and suspended for engaging in non-horse-friendly conduct like hyperflexion, they would clean up their acts pretty quickly, whether or not they think it's harmful to the horses, because it would impact their career and their ability to make money. 4, reward riders who employ good welfare practices in training and competition. So start structuring shows to reward dressage riders who are riding like this. This is you have no idea how hard it was for me to find a photo that I thought was a good photo for upper level dressage. I scoured Getty's Images and other free photo databases for probably over 10 hours collectively. Could not find one that I felt comfortable using. This is a rider that commented on one of my things and shared some of these photos, and I asked her permission to use them. And it's one of the best upper level dressage photos I've seen. And her horse is consistently in front of the vertical or on the vertical and doesn't have a gaping mouth or frothing spit around the lips. Anyways. 5, set fair expectations for age-related classes to reduce harmful early age training with skeletally immature horses. This is an important one because if we encourage people to engage in practices that are harmful from the get-go of a horse's riding career, it does not set them up for success. So what is in horse-friendly riding for the rider? 1, healthier horses. Stress is expensive to the body and it can cause lasting chronic damage. 2, better performance, as stress can impede learning and they're not going to retain information as well if they're in fight or flight mode and are focused on trying to survive what they perceive to be a dangerous event. 3, improved safety. Horses who are over threshold and engaging in flight behaviors actively are more dangerous. They behave more erratically and they pose way more risk to riders' bodily safety. 4, setting an example for broader animal welfare. And 5, maintaining the horse industry social license. Okay, these are just the references, and I can send people the list of references if they're interested in looking at any of the studies that I cited. But essentially, horse-friendly practice oftentimes is going to involve us not necessarily getting to do what's easiest and quickest in competition. And that's the way it should be, especially at the upper levels. I think we need to hold these riders to a higher standard because if they're going to be in international competition rings, I believe that's a privilege that should be earned, not freely given to anyone who has the money to be there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shelby.